What's up guys, I'm back with another video discussing the next generation Xbox and going over the specs leaks that have happened as well as the pricing and stuff. And this video is going to be discussing the specs specifically and discussing whether or not they are legit and what we may or may not see from this generation of consoles. So I am also planning on making another video discussing further the actual hardware we can come to expect from this generation. I decided to split these videos in two, that way it's not one super long video discussing why this post is supposedly fake or it's legit, as well as talking about the actual hardware that's probably going to be inside these next generation consoles. So I decided to split them up into two, so discussing this specific leak and then also discussing what hardware we probably are actually going to see in these consoles. So this specific leak, if you guys haven't checked out the video I did previously, that will be linked at the end of the video, but I made a video discussing this leak that appeared on Reddit of this next generation Xbox, as well as the PlayStation 5 and the leak specs, launch windows, prices, and games and other stuff as well. So we discussed all that in a separate video, but now we're going to be discussing the legitimacy of this and more so the specs and release date and pricing of it. So first off, let's start out with the Xbox One, the streaming box, codenamed Lockhart, supposedly priced at $249, and the CPU that we have in it is a custom 8-core 16-thread Zen 2 CPU, and it will have a custom Navi GPU at 4+ teraflops, a 12GB GDDR6 memory setup with a 1TB NVMe SSD at 1GB per second. So for $249, in my opinion, this all sounds quite fishy for $249. This is more something I would expect to see from like a $500 console. Say, let's take for example the storage. So if you look up and run right now 1TB NVMe SSD on Google, the first thing that's going to pop up is a Samsung 970 EVO M.2 1TB PCIe NVMe SSD. So this is from Newegg, and on Newegg right now at the time of recording this video, it retails for $247.99, 248 bucks just for the SSD for this system. So for a $249 console to feature a $248 NVMe SSD, that doesn't seem exactly likely. Next thing is a 12GB GDDR6 memory setup. If we look at graphics cards, let's first take the RTX 2070. This is a graphics card that came out very recently. It came out here towards the end of 2018, and this graphics card only features an 8GB setup of GDDR6 memory. Now this streaming box is supposedly going to feature 12GB of it, so it'll feature 50% more memory than an RTX 2070. And speaking of which, the RTX 2080 even shares the same amount of memory. The RTX 2080 also shares 8GB of GDDR6 memory. It's only when we move up to cards like the RTX 2080 Ti that we actually see, in this specific card, we see 11GB of GDDR6 memory. Now this console is supposedly going to be rocking 12GB, so an extra gig over the RTX 2080 Ti, all for $249. That seems a little bit fishy, but I do want to point out that the release dates for these consoles are supposedly looking at holiday 2020, so almost 2021 by the time we actually see this. So it's about 2 years off of where we are now. So in 2 years, we could likely see the price of GDDR6 memory drop significantly and make it cheaper to produce and also cheaper to get in higher quantities like this in 12GB stacks. And the same thing goes for the storage as well. In 2 years, it's likely that we're, the mainstream, it might be 2TB NVMe SSDs. So this same SSD for, 248 bucks might actually only drop down to maybe about 100. Plus, when we talk about these specs and pricing and stuff wise, Microsoft is getting these parts obviously cheaper than a regular consumer would, because Microsoft is buying these in huge bulk quantities, and they have partnership deals with all of these companies, and so they are not going to be getting it for the same price as a consumer would, but it's honestly not that far off as well. They're not going to be charging $5 for an NVMe SSD for Microsoft for each one. They're obviously going to still charge a significant amount for it, but it's going to be way cheaper than, say, a consumer, say you or I, could just go to Newegg or Amazon and buy one of these for. The GPU setup for the streaming box is going to be a custom Navi GPU at 4+ teraflops. Now, Navi is an interesting GPU setup because Navi releases this year in 2019. The closest graphics card from AMD that we have at this point to Navi is the AMD Radeon 7 GPU. So this is a 7 nanometer GPU that will feature 16 gigabytes of HBM2 memory and with an FP32 compute process single thread performance of 13.8 teraflops per second. And so for $249, I could see Microsoft partnering with AMD to come up with a custom kind of cut down version of it, especially to run at 4 teraflops. The Vega 7 is sitting at 13.8 teraflops. So to get about a third of that performance for a GPU for, this price point is honestly pretty likely. Also, like I said, you got to think about in 2 years, where is this going to be? So, for the Vega 7 to be almost 2 years old at this point, and for it to have a third of the performance, you could likely see that in a system that only costs $249. That doesn't seem that far off. The CPU is going to be an 8-core 16-thread Zen 2 CPU. So Zen 2 is also another technology that's supposed to release here in 2019. And now the 8 cores lines up well because the original Xbox, the Xbox One S, Xbox One X, PlayStation 4, and PlayStation 4 Pro, they all are 8-core CPUs, 8-core systems. And it would make the most sense for the next generation console to have another 8-core CPU. That way it ensures the most compatibility with the previous generation. And that way Microsoft doesn't really have to do a lot more technical things to ensure backwards compatibility. As well as, most even like PC hardware is moving towards more cores. So the current mainstream is 8 cores. If you look at, say, like the Intel 9900K, that is an 8-core 16-thread CPU. If you look at the 9700K, that's an 8-core 8-thread CPU. We used to only have 4 cores as the mainstream on PCs. Well, now it's moving up to 8 cores and even more, with AMD really leading the charge with just slapping on more cores onto their CPUs. One thing that I do want to point out, though, that is kind of like a citation needed, though, is the 16 threads for this system. So apparently this system is going to support hyper-threading, which, to my knowledge, I don't know of any like Xbox or PlayStation that supports hyper-threading. To my knowledge, like I say, I'm not 100% versed in this specific concept right here, but I'm pretty sure that the original Xbox One, the Xbox One S, the Xbox One X, and the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro, they're just straight 8-core CPUs. They don't have 16 threads. They just have 8 cores and basically 8 threads with them. So for this to have hyper threading, to have 16 threads is kind of crazy and would ensure more performance for the CPU, which could be a good thing. And then another interesting thing to point out is that it's going to be a Zen 2 CPU. Zen 2, once again, is coming out in 2019 and will feature a lot of really high-end CPUs that is set to rival Intel's current mainstream in CPU setup, with higher and higher clock speeds, so even CPUs reaching up to 5 gigahertz, and CPUs with more and more cores to compete with Intel's HEDT high-end desktop setup. So I think that Zen 2 might be a little bit fishy for this console, especially for the streaming one, because Zen 2 is going to be coming out in 2019, in about mid-2019, and then for Microsoft to ship a console in holiday 2020 with Zen 2 CPUs, I don't know about that. It seems kind of fishy for them to only have a year and a half, more so about a year, to be able to really load up in creating and producing millions of Zen 2 CPUs for these new generations of consoles. You got to think of the production cost of that as well, and even Intel is struggling with 10 nanometer, and Zen 2 is a 7 nanometer process node. Intel is going to be doing some 10 nanometer CPUs, but they're starting with like their really low end chips. You're not seeing any 8-core 16-thread CPUs running on 10 nanometers from Intel right now, but AMD is going to be rocking some Zen 2 ones at 7 nanometers about mid-year this year. And for AMD to also support these consoles at 7 nanometers as well, and have 8-core 16-thread CPUs in them for Zen 2, I think that's unlikely, but it could happen. What I think would be more likely to happen is just to see the original Zen have a Zen CPU for the original like Ryzen CPUs, or even Zen Plus would be more likely. Zen Plus would honestly be my guess for this system rather than Zen 2. Zen Plus seems more likely because currently I mean, in September of 2018 and in 2018, we got quite a few 8-core 16-thread CPUs from AMD with Ryzen 7 that had clock rates of between 2.8 gigahertz all the way up to about 4.3 with its boost. And these chips were about $300 each. And so for it to be all in a $250 console, you got to think 2 years down the line, yeah, it might be possible for Zen Plus. I really don't think it's likely for Zen 2. I think it's way more likely for Zen Plus, though, for this platform. Another thing I do want to point out, though, is that for this price point, it has been, done quite a few times in the past where system manufacturers will actually take a hit on their products. Sony has done this, and I believe even Microsoft has done this, where they'll sell their consoles for cheaper than it actually costs them to manufacture it, so they'll actually lose money every time they sell a console, but they'll try and make up that price and that cost with software. So they'll get you into the system. Let's say you buy a PlayStation 4. Okay, well they lost, say, let's make up an example here. They lost $50 on that sale. Well, if you go into the PlayStation store and you buy 2 games, that well overcovers that $50 that they lost, and you just bought 2 games, and you're locked into their ecosystem now. Now you have their system, and you have games for their system. Plus, you also got to pay for PlayStation Plus, as well as you're probably going to get a new game every couple months. So Sony just constantly keeps getting a cut of that money. And since they actually, they got you into their ecosystem for a cheap price, they can keep you in their ecosystem and keep getting money out of you. But it comes a point, though. Microsoft isn't going to just, undercut themselves by a couple $100 every single time they sell a console. But I could see this $250 price point actually being pretty accurate. I think maybe along the lines of $300 might be a little bit more accurate. But since it is a streaming console, 4+ teraflops seems about right for about a streaming console. Especially when you look at in current consoles, the neighborhood of 4 teraflops is about the same performance as a PlayStation 4 Pro. And if this is just a streaming console from Microsoft servers and Microsoft service, it doesn't really need to do a whole lot of graphics processing on its own. So it can have, a relatively weak GPU in comparison to other systems, only at 4 teraflops, and still be able to run games really, really powerful. And the CPU can do most of the encoding and decoding with that 8-core 16-thread CPU and 12 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory setup. For the next generation Xbox, the Anaconda one, this one's going to be at $499. This one also features an 8-core 16-thread Zen 2 CPU, a custom Navi GPU, this one at 12+ teraflops per second, 3 times the performance of the Lockhart, 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 compared to 12 gigabytes on the Lockhart, and a 1 terabyte NVMe SSD at 1 gigabyte plus per second. So same storage setup with an extra 4 gigabytes of memory, as well as 3 times the performance out of the GPU and the exact same CPU. Now this makes a lot of sense here. You want to keep the CPU basically the same in each system, and this is what we saw with the Xbox One to the Xbox One S to the Xbox One X, is the CPU basically remained untouched. It was still all Jaguar based, it was still all 8 cores. The Xbox One X did give it the CPU a little bit of a clock boost, but not a whole lot. There wasn't anything really radically different. That was just there to ensure the maximum compatibility in between games and with the systems. So it's unlikely that we would see really any difference in CPUs between the Lockhart and the Anaconda for that reason. The GPU is really where they can stretch things here, because the GPU can be changed around a whole lot and still ensure compatibility with games. The only things that it really changes is just graphics settings. The CPU changes way more than just graphics settings. So changing around the CPU would have way more impacts and way more changes than changing around the GPU would. So in comparison to the Xbox One X, the Xbox One X rocks a 6 teraflop GPU in it right now, but this one is going to be featured 12+. So it's going to have double the graphics performance of the current Xbox One X, which would ensure, easily 4K 60 FPS games and really high details and higher frame rates for games as well. But once again, let's put this all in context. The RTX 2080 only has 10.1 teraflops of single precision performance, and the RTX 2080 Ti has 13.4. So this new console is going to have about the same graphics performance in between the RTX 2080 Ti and the RTX 2080. And it's also supposedly going to feature double the memory setup of the RTX 2080 and even 5 extra gigabytes over the RTX 2080 Ti. Now this is all NVIDIA side, so now let's actually take a look at AMD side, since it's going to be an AMD Navi GPU based system. The current Radeon Vega 64 GPU rocks 13.7 teraflops, and the Vega 7 rocks 13.8. The Vega 64 is 8 gigabytes of HBM2, and the Vega 7 is 16 gigabytes of HBM2. So it's going to be about apparently the same GPU-ish, about of a Vega 7, which is kind of odd since the Vega 7 retails right now at $699. So we're basically going to be getting something along the lines of a $700 GPU in a $500 console, as well as an 8-core 16-thread CPU, 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory, and a 1 terabyte NVMe SSD, all for $500. Ooh, that seems really unlikely. I think that the GPU in this console would be more along the lines of maybe 10 teraflops rather than 12. 12 seems a little unlikely, although AMD still has, like a year and a half or so, almost 2 years, to kind of perfect this technology and to make something that honestly they could make a GPU that hits 12 teraflops for a console. And one thing more to point out about these consoles is that it said that they're going to support ray tracing through DXR. Now, ray tracing, see, that's another thing that honestly kind of baffles me about this leak, though, that makes me think this is fake. And that's that apparently games on this generation of console is going to support ray tracing. See, ray tracing, which is barely introduced with the RTX graphics card lineup, NVIDIA's new graphics card lineup, and even graphics cards like the RTX 2080 Ti can't really support ray tracing that well. You can do maybe 1080p 60 FPS, but good luck hitting 4K 60 FPS with ray tracing on. Not even SLI 2080 Ti's can do that at this moment in time. They might have a lower quality ray tracing than NVIDIA's does, but I still think that ray tracing is well off rather than this generation of consoles. I really don't think that we're going to see ray tracing on consoles in 2020. I could see it coming in an updated console for, say, like the Xbox One X, how that console is way more powerful and is way more 4K compatible and capable than the original Xbox was. I could see them releasing a newer console after the Anaconda that's even more powerful, that could actually support ray tracing in games. But I think that having ray tracing on a console coming out in holiday 2020 is way too early, and honestly makes me way more suspicious of this. And then he goes on to say that he has leaked specs of the PlayStation 5 for $400. It's going to feature that same 8-core, 16-thread Zen 2 CPU, a custom Navi GPU at 8+ teraflops per second, so double the performance of the Lockhart, but then 2/3 the performance of the Anaconda. It's also going to feature only 12 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory, so the same memory setup as the Lockhart, that streaming console, and it's also going to feature a 1 terabyte SSD. It doesn't say NVMe SSD, so I would assume this one's just a regular old SATA SSD, not an NVMe PCIe one. This is another thing that makes me suspicious of this, is that the PlayStation 5 is only going to cost $400 and that new Xbox is going to cost $500. That is really suspicious. I don't think that Microsoft is going to fall for that again. I think Microsoft is going to release a console at the same price point as Sony's console, but just try and get more performance out of it. Microsoft has also stated that they don't want to be beat in performance again. They want to have the most powerful console again with this new system. They don't want Sony to beat them in the power department, and one way to ensure that is by having it cost $100 more, but I think that they're going to alienate a lot of customers by having it cost $100 more. I think what they really honestly should do here is price it the same as the PlayStation 5. If they have to make it $400, make it $400. That was one of the big selling points of the PlayStation 4, is that, hey, it costs $100 less than the Xbox One, and it's more powerful. Okay, well, the same argument could be said with this generation. Well, the Xbox, Anaconda costs the exact same amount as the PlayStation 5, but it's way more powerful. Well, I'm going to go with that console then. I think this price would honestly be one of the killer things about it. There's not a whole lot of console gamers out there who care that much about the actual hardware inside. Hardware like this is only really, found in like PCs and in PC enthusiasts. Only real like huge PC enthusiasts care about this kind of performance. Most console players, you got to realize that most console players, they just go out to GameStop or whatever, buy this console and play, say, games like Fortnite on it that aren't the most graphically demanding. That don't need an 8-core 16-thread CPU with 12+ teraflops of graphics performance and 16 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory. They're just looking for something to play their games. They're not looking for the most powerful thing out there to play their games. They're just looking for something to play their games. And if it's cheap and it plays games, they're probably going to get it. So that's my thoughts on this. I honestly think that this leak here is fake. I could see it being true. He does say that there will be a bunch of games that are cross-gen. Like, I don't doubt that some of these games and stuff are going to be true, as well as the studio acquisitions. The thing that I just don't believe in this post is the actual hardware inside. I really don't think they're going to get a Zen 2 CPU in these next generation consoles. I don't think that we're going to get a brand new Navi GPU in these consoles. I think that we're going to get a little bit aged hardware, but with these like console optimizations that will make up the difference. Maybe I'll be wrong about this. Maybe I'll be absolutely like blown away with these specs. But pretty much every single time a console is announced and released and stuff, there's always disappointment there. With every single console, we were disappointed when the Xbox One, PlayStation 4 were first announced. We're like, oh crap, because they really didn't even compete with like PC hardware at the time, or even years old PC hardware at the time. And then with the PlayStation 4 Pro, that was a disappointment as well. It really didn't do a whole lot of 4K games, and it was just kind of like a letdown. And even the Xbox One X, to an extent, it still features that same old AMD Jaguar mobile CPU from clear back in 2013. So there's always going to be some sort of letdown when it comes to consoles. Consoles aren't these high-end systems like a PC is. That's what a PC is for. If you want the best hardware and you don't want to customize it, then you can get a PC. But then again, the truth is that consoles are becoming more and more PC-like, so this could mean that this would turn out real. So we will find out in the next couple months as developers start actually getting their hands on dev kits for these consoles, what the actual specs and stuff are. And I'm sure that Microsoft will most likely talk about it at this year's E3, as well as maybe Sony as well. So there you guys go. Let me know you guys' thoughts on this in the comments down below. Remember, I will be making a video talking about the exact hardware that we are likely to see in this new Xbox setup in these next generation consoles. So make sure you guys check out that video when it goes live. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.